The formal reception at the British Embassy in Berlin looked less like a party and more like a living propaganda poster. Medals caught the light and flung it back in blinding flashes. Uniforms were pressed to surgical precision, and crystal chandeliers rained cold brilliance over rows of clinking wine glasses. Power, polished, and on display. I moved through it all in black and white, a ghost in service attire, balancing a silver platter as if it were the only thing anchoring me to the room. Invisible, disposable. Exactly as planned. No one was supposed to see me tonight, certainly not as anything other than staff, and especially not my sister. But Lydia had always been able to find me no matter how deeply I buried myself. I felt her before I saw her. Across the marble floor, she stood with two German defense officials, laughter curling easily from her lips. Her emerald gown drank in the chandelier light and threw it back like a weapon. She looked untouchable. She laughed at something one of them said. Then her eyes locked onto mine. That smile, the one that never meant kindness, spread slowly, deliberately. She didn't wait for me to pass. She raised her glass just enough to draw attention and said, her voice carrying with surgical precision, "Well, look at you. Reduced to a server now." A pause. A beat. "I suppose the Navy finally decided it didn't need you anymore." One of the officials let out an uneasy laugh. The other feigned interest in the artwork adorning the wall. Lydia savored a deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes never wavering from mine. I maintained a blank expression. I'd honed that ability over the past 3 years. I placed the platter before her and offered, "Canapés?" The German official selected one without glancing my way. Lydia took nothing. She merely sustained that victorious smile, as though she'd already triumphed in some unspoken debate. I proceeded onward before she could deliver another barb. My heartbeat remained even. That was the essence of the role. Continue advancing. Maintain vigilance. This evening wasn't solely about her. There were more significant figures present. All around there were stars and stripes, admirals from the U.S., commanders from Germany, arms dealers, lawmakers. If you sought a portrait of the Alliance's elite, this was the scene. And at its heart stood Douglas Harlan, the individual I'd pursued for months. He was exchanging greetings with a software mogul I recalled from a digital defense summit ages ago. I didn't pause, but my attention fixed on the compact, gift-wrapped parcel Harlan discreetly tucked into the man's coat pocket. I threaded through fellow servers bearing trays of spirits, marking the positions of the embassy guards. Their focus rested on the attendees, but not the ones under my scrutiny. That suited me. This night, I wasn't depending on them. A cluster of American commanders by the lounge erupted in guffaws over an anecdote, obscuring my line of sight momentarily. Once they parted, I glimpsed Admiral Scott Whitaker, the 4-star overseeing U.S. operations in Europe, presiding over a circle of high-ranking envoys. The sort of figure you didn't approach without cause. I possessed one. I persisted in motion, allowing the room's flow to guide me. The ensemble performed gentle swing music, the type that goes unnoticed until it ceases. The aroma of grilled beef and warm rolls wafted from the preparation area. Near the entryway, the German host was delivering a brief address in dual tongues, but no one in this section paid heed. Lydia materialized beside me abruptly. She excelled at that as well. "Do they at least permit you to sample the remnants?" she inquired, her tone laced with artificial kindness. I offered her the sort of courteous partial smile reserved for a passerby on the street. "Enjoy your evening, Lydia." She cocked her head, examining me as if puzzling over my lack of the anticipated response. "Don't tell me you're still resentful about what happened. You really ought to let it go. It's unbecoming." If she only understood how far I'd progressed. I withdrew before she could press further. My earpiece buzzed faintly. 2 words from a familiar tone. "Package shifting." I didn't respond verbally, merely altered my path toward the distant end of the hall. Harlan was advancing that way, navigating the throng with the same software mogul trailing. As I glided past one of the high windows facing the embassy grounds, my image in the glass appeared precisely as intended, nondescript, unmemorable. That's what enabled success. No one sought Brianna Cole, former U.S. Navy cyber intelligence officer. They overlooked her entirely. The Admiral's assembly drifted toward the room's core, nearer to Harlan's trajectory. Precision in timing was crucial. A premature action, and I'd sabotage it all. Too delayed, and my knowledge would be irrelevant. I spotted Lydia again across the space. She was chuckling once more, but it seemed strained, her glance darting my way for an instant. Perhaps she pondered my presence here. Perhaps she already harbored doubts. It was inconsequential. This evening wasn't for sparking her curiosity. It was for compelling the appropriate individuals to recognize what they'd overlooked previously. And that instant drew nearer with each stride Harlan made. I readjusted the platter in my grasp, surveying the room anew. Whitaker continued conversing, oblivious to how swiftly the night was poised to transform. Harlan was narrowing the distance, the tiny parcel still concealed in his jacket's inner compartment. I positioned myself, my grip firming subtly on the platter as I advanced toward the lateral exit, my form operating on reflex. The tinkling of stemware and the subdued murmur of dialogue receded in my thoughts, supplanted by the clear recollection of a distinct chamber 3 years prior, where every gaze was riveted on me. In that era, I wasn't clad in serving garb. I wore navy dress whites, impeccably tailored, decorations aligned per protocol, footwear so glossed they mirrored the ceiling illumination. I'd been called to a sealed session at Naval Cyber Operations Headquarters. The space carried a subtle scent of scorched brew and circulated atmosphere. Commander Aaron Thorpe presided at the elongated table's end, the type who could convey fortune or devastation without altering her demeanor. To her right, a group of agents from investigations and legal. To her left, 2 from the Alliance Coordination Bureau. Each held a dossier before them, and each of those dossiers bore my name on the front. "Lieutenant Cole," Thorpe commenced, "you're here concerning a security violation involving sensitive sonar intelligence under your authorization." I held my tone steady. "Ma'am, I detected that violation. I reported it. That's not what our records indicate." She wrapped the dossier ahead of her. They presented a tidy compilation, access records displaying my credentials, timestamps aligning flawlessly with the pilfered documents, and an IP trail conveniently linking to my duty station. For every rebuttal I offered, they possessed a counter. Every shred of evidence I believed might aid had been rejected as ambiguous. I requested time for my own assessment. They declined. I sought an impartial digital examination. They claimed it was already completed. The swiftness of their replies indicated they'd decided prior to my arrival. At one juncture, I glanced at the viewing pane. Lydia was there in casual attire, murmuring to an unfamiliar figure. She avoided my eyes. The session concluded in under an hour. The judgment was conclusive, honorably separated, all authorizations withdrawn, prohibited from secure networks. They refrained from outright treason charges, but the insinuation lingered like a foul odor. Upon conclusion, I departed with a carton containing my belongings, kin snapshot, service tokens, a mug with the division's emblem. Lydia lingered in the corridor, propped against the partition as if awaiting transport. "You should simply accept it," she murmured softly. "Contesting it will only worsen your appearance." I halted, scrutinizing her expression for any trace of compassion. "You were aware of the violation?" Her mouth tensed just sufficiently to reveal I'd struck a nerve. "I can't address that. That's not a denial." She detached from the wall. "Go home, Bree. It's finished." I observed her depart, footwear echoing on the flooring. That noise endured in my memory beyond the formal separation documents. The ensuing months blurred into employment submissions and courteous denials. Private firms admired my expertise theoretically, but retreated upon discovering my exit rationale. Federal roles were unattainable. The Navy had inscribed a damning mark in my file, and none desired association. I returned to Vermont, to the modest lakeside village of our upbringing, assuming control of a quaint repair outlet, mending notebooks and shattered displays. Patrons addressed me as Miss Cole or Bry if they recalled from youth. No one termed me lieutenant any longer. Certain evenings, I'd perch on the veranda with a drink, gazing across the lake, questioning if I'd fabricated it all, if my profession had truly occurred, or merely a tale to alleviate futility. Yet whenever I reflected on the violation, on the specifics solely I could know, I reached the identical deduction. Someone had ensnared me, and Lydia had proximity to identify the culprit. I lacked evidence. Not yet. But I clung to the element the Navy hadn't stripped, the capacity to remain silent and await the opportune moment. One drizzly afternoon, roughly 6 months post-separation, a parcel reached the outlet sans sender details. Within was a plain data stick, unlabeled save for a solitary term etched into the casing. Siren, my former handle. The contents were ciphered, service level. Whoever dispatched it knew I'd decipher it in time, but the envelope held more. A creased missive in script I identified at once. My father's. Brianna, this is for when you're prepared. Rely on the schedule. I fixated on the phrases until the downpour smudged them. Dad had passed 2 years earlier. Thus, whatever resided on that stick was destined for me well before the violation, perhaps prior to my awareness. That evening, I secured the outlet prematurely and initiated the decryption. It resisted for an hour. It resisted for a week. But its mere existence conveyed a vital truth. I wasn't erroneous about the setup, and if my father had bequeathed something so delicate, it signified a path to rectification. I inserted the data stick into the protected notebook stowed beneath the counter, the one patrons never viewed. The cipher resisted like a fortified vault, strata upon strata, precisely as my father would engineer. He'd committed 30 years to naval intelligence and never relied on a barrier with a single mechanism. By midnight, I'd only unveiled the initial stratum. It was a folder with cryptic titles. Nothing coherent yet. But the genuine astonishment wasn't electronic. 2 weeks on, following a tempest that felled power for much of the village, I ascended to the family home's loft to inspect for seepage. That's when I detected a dislodged plank beneath the edge chest. I'd frequented that loft countless times without notice. The plank lifted readily, exposing a compact metal grip. I tugged. A grime-shrouded vault nestled in the dim recess, sized for a few volumes and perhaps a sidearm. The combo mechanism felt acquainted, identical to Dad's office model. I inputted the sequence I'd committed to memory as a child, the one he claimed unlocked the essentials. The tumbler snapped, and the hatch opened. Inside lay 3 items, an auxiliary storage unit, a hidebound ledger, and a creased sheet with my name in his penmanship. The memo was concise. Brianna, if you're perusing this, it means the gale arrived for you. This unit contains what I couldn't voice, and the ledger will explain why. Some you confide in are not as they appear. Stay low until you possess all. I sat legs crossed on the loft flooring, my pants gathering dust, and opened the ledger. The records commenced 5 years back, predating my separation, when Dad was posted in Europe. Initially it was routine, drill notations, initiative refreshes, but pages onward, the mood altered. He'd monitored anomalous signal flows on Alliance sonar arrays, echoes from unauthorized locales, during unscheduled periods. He surmised an internal source was relaying specs to an external entity. The further he probed, the more he referenced a coordinator in the U.S. Foreign Service. He never inscribed the identity, solely initials. LC. I gazed at those symbols until they hazed. Subsequent records cataloged conferences, minor particulars, timelines, and sites. Munich, D.C., Kaiserslautern. He'd chronicled each irregularity, each unanswered query, each impeded probe, Then an annotation dated mere weeks before his demise in a drill mishap. The violation is nearer than they suspect. If anything befalls me, Brianna will know whom to trust. The auxiliary unit was another bastion of ciphering. I wouldn't breach it in a loft with a lantern, so I transported all to my outlet, bolting the entrance after. Laboring on both units became my nocturnal habit. Days, I restored folks' faulty devices and purged infections. Nights, I eroded the safeguards my father had established. He crafted it so documents unveiled sequentially. Solve one, gain a hint for the next. It was gradual, but fragments coalesced into an image. Captured correspondences, network traces, audio fragments. One evening, I accessed an audio labeled merely Session 9. My father's timbre resonated in the space, firm and composed. The chief conduit flows via Harlan's web. He's collaborating with an internal at Foreign Affairs to quash the probe. That individual accesses Alliance liaison rules and is prepared to hinder investigations. If Brianna ever hears this, know you were correct. End quote. It wasn't definitive proof, but it neared. Harlan's identity peppered internal suspicion rosters before my implication, and now my father articulated it months prior to my summons to that session. The data stick mailed seemed to align with the unit structure. Dual portions of identical communique. Whoever forwarded it anticipated I'd eventually hold both. It posed queries I couldn't resolve yet. Who else knew my father had uncovered Harlan? Why dispatch the initial segment only post-separation? And why hazard postage whatsoever? The ledger's final leaf wasn't a record. It was a printed image, folded doubly. It depicted my father at a formal banquet, formal attire, honors on his torso, clasping hands with a figure I identified instantly, Admiral Scott Whitaker. Positioned just aft, somewhat averted from the lens, was Lydia. I placed the image on the workstation and reclined in my seat. Power had restored hours prior, but the outlet's air still bore a faint precipitation scent. Somewhere beyond, the identical folks who'd terminated my vocation persisted, still impervious, or so they believed. I closed the outlet early that night, drawing the shades before activating the protected notebook. The image of my father, Whitaker, and Lydia rested angled against the partition, gazing back as if anticipating clarification. I lacked one yet, but I knew who might assist in uncovering it. I launched a ciphered messaging app and hunted a contact unused for years, Tessa Grant. Our last exchange, she was continents distant, entangled with dubious figures, and I'd expended connections to extract her. Then, she was a premier infiltration expert turned freelance coder. Now, from the bland avatar and inactive updates, she maintained discretion. The note I transmitted was straightforward. Require your insight. Major risks. Vintage allies only. 2 hours on, the response arrived. A single line. You've captured my interest, Siren. We arranged a dialogue via voice distortion relay. Upon connecting, her manner was relaxed, but I detected the breath alteration when I uttered Harlan's name. Yeah, I've encountered him in several databases, Tessa stated. He's cautious, never handles directly, always 2 degrees separated. Why stir that hornet's nest? Because he stripped something from me and my father. That silenced her. Then, forward what you have. Everything. I paused. This stays with you. You preserved my existence in Kabul. I'm not betraying you for profit. I transferred ciphered duplicates of the unit sections and the father's audio. As she commenced analysis, I delved my personal offline repositories, messages, ancient investigation dossiers mirrored pre-clearance loss. A void existed in the logs from the month before separation, as if erased of every Harlan reference. 3 days later, Tessa contacted. You won't favor this. Half the network flow your dad noted originated from a fortified subnet in D.C. Foreign Affairs. The auths belonged to someone with Envoy Shield and Alliance access. I didn't need to voice the name. She did. LC. Before reply, another voice interjected. Delilah Voss, my former investigations partner. She'd been monitoring the identical ciphered board where Tessa and I intersected. Delilah had remained in service but off official paths. I've got intel you'll desire, Delilah said. Harlan's slated for Berlin in 2 weeks for a joint U.S.-German reception at the embassy. Rumor is he's conveying a parcel. Compact, premium. I can't approach, but you could. Why me? Because you merge seamlessly, and because Lydia will attend. You want her pinned. That's the venue. I leaned back. The notion of sharing space with Lydia tensed my jaw, but the chance was ideal to dismiss. Delilah outlined her knowledge. Harlan utilized the reception for a transfer. The receiver likely connected to the identical alliance sonar violation. Embassy protection would be stringent, but geared toward guest safety, not guest oversight. That's slim, I remarked. Accurate, but if you verify the exchange, Whitaker must respond. He's sought pretext against Harlan for ages. Tessa interjected. I can equip you gadgets, mic in a button, lens in a serving grip, pulse emitter for diversion. I weighed the setup. I'd require camouflage, a pretext for presence. Delilah snickered. Odd about embassy affairs. They perpetually seek additional personnel. I can insert your alias on a provisional catering list. You'd be unseen. Unseen suits, I replied. That night, I cleared the outlet's workspace and arrayed necessities. Nothing extravagant, merely implements that wouldn't alarm if patted down. I stowed a thin recorder, a fiber lens stylus, and dual earpieces with vibration comms. Tessa vowed to supply the remainder via anonymous deposit pre-flight. I repeatedly returned to that image on the workspace. My father had grinned that evening with Whitaker, likely believing he'd found an internal ally. If erroneous, he hadn't survived to rue it. The scheme was basic theoretically. Integrate, shadow Harlan, capture the transfer, ensure the proper observer noted. But inwardly, I knew the true trial was confronting Lydia. We hadn't coexisted spatially in years, and last she'd departed sans glance. This time she'd perceive me, and I wouldn't depart foremost. I set my brew aside and accessed the embassy blueprint on the notebook, the one Delilah had covertly provided via secure channel. Every passage, utility hall, and access was denoted. The serving path traversed the hall's midpoint, beyond the elite zone, and bordered the secluded area for confidential talks sans surveillance. That was my course. Tessa contacted amid my mapping. Gear prepared. Button mic, grip lens, band emitter. Power for 6 hours, but don't strain. And don't improvise if nabbed. I can't code you from German detention. Acknowledged, I said, sipping the chilled brew. Delilah joined. Recall, embassy guards hold a roster of all staff. Your alias is Brianna Carr. My cover name for the catering roster, interim from a Berlin service firm. Sustain role even if a past acquaintance identifies, especially Lydia. I fixed on the blueprint. She won't pose issue. Delilah wavered. Certain? She can utter anything. I'm not there for her. Reality was nuanced. I'd trained years for composure under questioning, but kin taunts were distinct armament, and Lydia knew precise targets. Over ensuing days, I rehearsed the reception protocol to instinct. Platter in left, right free for retrieving vessels or triggering emitter. Gaze perpetually sweeping sans excessive head motion. I drilled neutral tone in English and German, alternating fluidly. Tessa deposited the kit in a station locker near Hauptbahnhof. I retrieved in shades and wrap. Merely another visitor evading the mist. Back in my leased unit, I spread it on the bedding, buttons, power packs, the altered grip with embedded optic. All matte ebony. No reflective surfaces to snag illumination. The final element was the earpiece. Vibration meant no evident cable to ear, and no adjacent would overhear unless intimate. Tessa's tone emerged in trial. Audio test. Share a confidential. I once swapped Lydia's coffee sugar with salt, I stated. Tessa chuckled. Vengeance and trickery? Quintessential service-kin vibe. 2 nights pre-reception, Delilah forwarded a concise profile on principals. Harlan, evidently, 2 German arms merchants on alliance monitors for years, a private tech advisor with oddly vast funds, and Lydia, noted as senior U.S. coordinator on the formal roster. She's been in Europe the past year, Delilah noted. Sessions, bargains, standard envoy waltz, no verified tie to Harlan, but your dad's logs weren't haphazard. I browsed the images. Lydia at a summit with German officials. Lydia clasping hands with industry agents. Lydia at an alliance gathering mere steps from Harlan. If others noted the trend, they hadn't reacted, perhaps unwilling. Reception morning, I donned the black and white staff uniform. No adornments, hair restrained, no scent. I smoothed each fold and seam to confirm inconspicuousness. The button mic was discreet enough for uniform integration. The grip lens tested sharp on Tessa's stream. You've 6 hours from initial arrival to final salute, Tessa said via link as I donned my coat. Recall, you're not seizing proof, you're ensuring the right one witnesses. I secured the unit and entered Berlin's crisp breeze. The embassy towered ahead, banners fluttering in the gust, guards verifying IDs at the portal. Within, the serving team already ferried platters from prep to setup. I integrated seamlessly. One German attendant passed me a pile of stems and uttered swiftly in German. I responded fluidly, my inflection honed from practice years. He assented and resumed utensil buffing. The hall was more lavish than recalled from duty eras. Gleaming wood floors, soaring blooms, fixtures cascading radiance. In hours, this space would teem with those deeming themselves invincible. Delilah's tone whispered via earpiece. Harlan just entered. East portal. He's carrying a small parcel in left, now jacketed. And go. I hoisted a platter of wine and initiated my loop through the space. Each pace nearing the instant I'd orchestrated since my father's ledger reached my grasp. I wove through the assembly with the consistent cadence of a veteran server, my gaze shifting more than my cranium. Harlan was simple to trail, his graying locks, tailored ensemble, and that arrogant partial grin that tempted a swipe. He progressed toward a group of German commanders near the West Barrier. A civilian awaited there, mid-40s, groomed hair, ebony-framed specs. He appeared the type to betray kin for compensation. Delilah's tone vibrated in my ear. That's Moreau, arms dealer. He's on every monitor we maintain. I sustained my tempo, proffering wine to attendees sans delay. Harlan shook Moreau's hand, his left arm gliding just a fraction between them. When they separated, Moreau's coat hung differently. He'd stashed something away. The platter lens recorded it all. I altered my path, ensuring the button mic captured their short dialogue in German. It wasn't extensive, Moreau remarked. It's here. And Harlan responded, Perfect. I modified my circuit to edge nearer to them, framing Harlan's profile. He appeared at ease, as if this were merely another weekday. But Moreau kept darting looks over his shoulder toward the hall's midpoint. I traced his gaze and spotted Lydia. She was chuckling with 2 German officials, her palm resting gently on one man's sleeve in that rehearsed manner she possessed. Then she glanced toward Harlan and offered the tiniest of nods. Harlan didn't reciprocate, but he meandered toward the northern edge where Admiral Whitaker was engrossed in discussion with the U.S. envoy. Tessa's voice interrupted. You capturing this? Every shot? I murmured without lip movement. A server bearing a platter of starters crossed my route. I evaded him, keeping my focus on Harlan. Moreau lingered, merging into a different cluster, but Harlan was nearing Whitaker now. The parcel remained in Moreau's pocket, yet the way Harlan positioned himself indicated he wasn't finished for the evening. I looped broadly, approaching from behind Whitaker's assembly. The Admiral held his goblet, grinning at a comment the envoy made. Harlan integrated seamlessly, entering the chat as if he fit right in. Lydia began advancing our way. Delilah's voice emerged softly. "If you're acting, this is the opportunity." I transferred the platter to my left hand, my right grazing the emitter on my band. One tap, and Tessa would route the stream to Delilah and Whitaker's protected line. But the instant needed to be flawless. Not prior to Lydia noticing me, not prior to her witnessing the unraveling. She arrived at the group's periphery, her gaze snapping to me instinctively. That grin, identical to those from every youthful dispute, every family gathering where she prevailed, emerged on her features. She refrained from speaking this time. She didn't need to. Harlan elevated his goblet a bit toward Whitaker. Emotion so nonchalant it might have been insignificant. Whitaker raised his in reply. My finger lingered over the emitter. The buzz of talk and chime of crystal permeated the atmosphere, but in my mind, it was hushed, just the rhythm of my heartbeat in my ears. Moreau remained across the space, feigning fascination with the sculpture. Lydia stood 3 feet from Whitaker, her stare locked on me now. Harlan's goblet inclined toward his mouth. I activated the emitter. Lydia's eyes sparked the moment my finger released the emitter. She advanced nearer, her tone raised just sufficiently for adjacent attendees to overhear. "Look at you, Bree." From Navy Whites to dispensing beverages at another soiree. "I suppose drive wasn't your forte after all." The German official next to her grinned courteously, evidently relishing the dig without grasping the backstory. Harlan didn't glance her way. His goblet remained midway to his lips, Whitaker's mere inches from a salute. I maintained my hold on the platter firm. "Would you care for a top-up, ma'am?" My inflection was even. Expert. The sort that offered her no leverage. Lydia angled her head, that gradual predator's gesture she employed when preparing to deepen the wound. "Oh, I believe you've accomplished plenty for one evening, unless naturally you're anticipating a gratuity." Whitaker pivoted subtly at her voice's sound, his attention sweeping over me for the initial time. I didn't avert my gaze from Lydia. My unoccupied hand realigned the platter just enough to maintain the lens directed precisely where required. Delilah's voice transmitted via the earpiece, subdued and composed. "Stream is active. Whitaker's line is accessible. Whatever transpires, he's observing it." Lydia must have detected something in my expression, something she couldn't decipher, because her grin wavered for a split second. She regained it swiftly, savoring her wine. "Still silent. That's acceptable. I'm certain someone here will identify you soon enough." Her words scarcely registered before Harlan adjusted his posture, aligning himself squarely in Whitaker's path. That was the instant, the one I'd constructed toward since the loft plank lifted. The atmosphere in the space seemed to densen. Stemware chimed. The swing ensemble reached a gentle peak, and Lydia inclined just an inch nearer. "Honestly, Bree, you could have achieved something meaningful. Instead—" "Pardon me," I interjected, advancing marginally toward Whitaker, my tone serene but keen enough to carve the gap between us. Her eyes constricted, but I didn't regard her again. The Admiral's goblet remained elevated. Harlan observed him like a falcon. I positioned the platter just beneath my torso, tilted so the mic seized every syllable. "Sir," I stated evenly, "your beverage." It was an utterly commonplace expression, but the manner Whitaker's forehead creased indicated he discerned the subtlety, one expert to another. Lydia began to utter more, likely primed with another slight, but she halted upon observing Whitaker regarding me directly. "Do I recognize you?" he inquired. Before I could reply, Harlan issued a brief, nearly undetectable headshake, as if cautioning Whitaker away. That solitary action sufficed to harden the Admiral's features. Lydia glanced between us, perplexed now. She disliked lacking command of a dialogue. I modified my stance so my form obstructed Harlan's view of my right hand. The band emitter still warm against my flesh. My heartbeat was consistent, my respiration deliberate. Whitaker's goblet suspended in midair. I leaned in sufficiently for my words to remain confidential. I inclined slightly toward Whitaker. The platter balanced effortlessly in my left hand and permitted the words to escape my lips in a firm murmur. "Don't sip." Whitaker stiffened mid-salute, eyes narrowing as if replaying the statement mentally. Then his gaze fastened on mine. Keener now, piercing through the years since I'd last donned a uniform. "Siren," he uttered under his breath, the moniker nearly drowned in the hall's ambient drone. Lydia's head whipped toward him. "What did you just—" He ignored her. He lowered his goblet and placed it on the table, the discreet action sufficient to convey a message without utterance. His hand grazed his coat's lapel twice, a gesture only the trained would identify. Harlan observed. His grin tautened, but he preserved poise. He retreated half a pace, surveying for Moreau. I readjusted the platter so the lens captured Harlan's subtle withdrawal, the perspective streaming directly to Delilah. Whitaker's voice was subdued, but distinct. "Is the parcel still active?" "Yes, sir. Left inner pocket, Moreau," I responded, the words scarcely audible. Lydia advanced a step toward me, her tone modulated in that restrained public envoy manner. "Bree, what are you doing? You're humiliating yourself." Her word choice nearly elicited a chuckle from me, humiliating myself. She still believed this concerned some trivial kin quarrel. Harlan directed toward the lateral exit. Whitaker remained stationary, but the alteration in his bearing conveyed everything. His focus lingered on me. "Remain near. Don't shatter disguise." Tessa's voice buzzed in my ear. "Pressing now. Protection streams overridden for 30 seconds. That's my limit. If you're igniting it, this is the moment." I permitted the platter to dip marginally, my finger activating the emitter once more. This time it wasn't merely a cue. It was the surge that dispatched the live stream to numerous protected receivers instantaneously. Harlan's features, Moreau's pocket, Lydia's closeness, all documented. Lydia's hand clamped on my wrist. "Bree, I'm warning you, cease this immediately." And Whitaker's voice was serene, but authoritative. "Miss Cole, retreat." She blinked at him, disconcerted by the command in his inflection. "Admiral, she's— retreat." Her grasp slackened. I executed one precise step ahead, removing her from my side view. Harlan was 2 paces from the portal now, Moreau slicing through the opposing throng. Whitaker's hand moved to his earpiece. "Seal the outlets." In under 3 seconds, 2 unadorned naval security personnel advanced to obstruct the primary exit while another converged on the side portal. The change in the space was understated but evident, like a tide reversing. Discussions faltered. Heads pivoted. Harlan's eyes darted toward the outlets, and for the first time that evening, I witnessed a fissure in his serenity. Lydia stood immobilized between me and Whitaker, observing the scenario develop without comprehending our arrival here. "Admiral," I murmured quietly, "you possess the sequence." He issued the slightest nod, his gaze unwavering on Harlan. The platter in my grasp abruptly felt less burdensome. The strain in my limb dissipated entirely when Whitaker took the platter from me, positioning it on the closest surface without diverting from Harlan. His voice was firm, incisive enough to penetrate the tunes. "Officer, secure him." 2 security personnel advanced swiftly, their coats unfastened now, armaments visible just sufficiently to prompt people to disperse like fluid. Harlan pivoted, palms partially elevated, crafting a composed demeanor he likely rehearsed before a mirror. "Admiral, this is a misapprehension." "Frisk him," Whitaker commanded. 1 personnel targeted the coat. Harlan stiffened, his right shoulder dipping. The other personnel detected the motion and twisted his limb back before he could access whatever resided within. The entire affair concluded in moments. Moreau's parcel slipped from Harlan's pocket into a proof container, Harlan himself in flexible restraints. Murmurs spread across the space. The swing ensemble hesitated but persisted, likely under rigid directives to continue unless injury occurred. Across the flooring, Moreau witnessed the events and headed toward a lateral passage. I didn't await a cue. 2:00, charcoal ensemble, specs. He's carrying the counterpart, I stated into the mic. One of the unadorned agents detached and intercepted him near the utility ingress, barring the portal with a relaxed posture that deceived no one versed in observation. Lydia finally stirred, advancing toward Whitaker. "Admiral, this is exceedingly unconventional." He didn't even pivot to confront her. "Miss Cole, if you have a declaration, now's the occasion." Her lips parted, but no syllables emerged. Her eyes shifted to me, and in that instant, I knew she grasped precisely what this entailed. Delilah's voice transmitted via my earpiece. "Parcel contains micro-storage embedded in the fabric. 2 terabytes condensed. Alliance sonar diagrams. Vessel deployment info. Ciphered transmission records. It's the violation, Bry. Your violation." The tension in my gut constricted, but it wasn't astonishment. It was validation. Every nocturnal uncertainty, every perhaps I fabricated it, evaporated. I'd been correct, and now the evidence resided in a naval security-proof container under half the embassy's scrutiny. Tessa's voice overlapped Delilah's. "I'm transmitting a site marker. It's a protected chamber in the lower level. Whitaker's proceeding there with the parcel. If you desire your custody sequence sealed impeccably, accompany him." Whitaker was already in motion, Harlan between the 2 personnel like a dignitary escorted to his vehicle. I maintained a half pace behind, surveying the assembly. Most attendees were petrified in position, attempting to appear disinterested while their gazes tracked every action. Lydia wasn't petrified. She was pursuing us, footwear echoing against the stone, her tone subdued and strained. "Scott, you can't simply haul individuals from a diplomatic affair." "Observe me," Whitaker replied without decelerating. In the utility passage, the clamor from the hall dulled to a faint drone. The illumination flattened, shadows accumulating in the nooks. 2 additional personnel joined the convoy, one assuming lead. We bypassed kitchen workers pressed to the barriers, their eyes expanded. In the lower level, a protection portal awaited, panel illuminated. Whitaker inputted a sequence, the mechanism disengaging with a solid clunk. Within was a barren space, steel surface, logging gear, protected proof storage. "Seat him," Whitaker directed. Harlan was thrust into the seat, flexible restraints still secure. Moreau arrived moments later under escort, his specs askew, coat disheveled. Whatever arrangement they'd orchestrated tonight was definitively terminated. A proof specialist with mittens seized the parcel, imaging it from all perspectives before dissecting it. The micro-storage cascaded out like tokens, even encased in static-resistant pouches. They appeared innocuous. Whitaker pivoted to me. "Lieutenant Cole, you're restored for this sequence's intent. You will observe every handover from here to investigations." The phrases struck like a precise blow after an extended conflict. He wasn't extending a courtesy. He was reinstating power I'd been deprived of 3 years prior. "Yes, sir," I affirmed. Lydia positioned in the threshold, her limbs crossed firmly. "You believe this absolves her? You have no conception what you're entering." Whitaker regarded her the way only a veteran admiral could, assessing, unyielding. "Conversely, Miss Cole, I believe I'm finally perceiving the entire landscape." Her mouth tensed, but she remained stationary. Harlan maintained silence, gaze fixed on the surface ahead. The proof specialist sealed the storage in a container and recorded them. Whitaker endorsed the document, then passed it to me. My signature followed his, the writing instrument gliding against the sheet. For the first time in years, my endorsement didn't seem like a procedure. It seemed like a counterstrike. Whitaker inserted the endorsed custody sequence document into the proof dossier, then reclined against the steel surface. "Lieutenant, I want to hear it from you, beginning to conclusion." I inhaled deeply, the sort preceding a lengthy endeavor, and outlined it all. The violation I'd pursued, the signal patterns indicating Harlan, the abrupt termination of my probe, and the investigations chamber where I'd been abandoned. I didn't embellish it, and I didn't omit Lydia's role in obstructing my entry to Alliance coordination records. Lydia didn't interject until I referenced my father's ledger. "You can't seriously depend on his jottings as proof," she declared, advancing deeper into the space. He was retired, disconnected, pursuing phantoms. Whitaker's attention didn't shift from me. "What's on that storage?" I delved into my satchel and positioned the 2 ciphered units on the surface, the one from the loft and the one dispatched to me. My father amassed these before his passing. I've been deciphering them for months. Half the documents align with the micro-storage you just extracted from Harlan. The remainder are internal exchanges connecting his web to someone within foreign affairs. Lydia's limbs crossed more rigidly. "Indirect." Delilah's voice buzzed from the protected communicator on the surface. "Not indirect. I just executed a checksum match. 37 documents are identical byte for byte to the units you confiscated tonight. Cole's origin possessed them long before Harlan traversed the continent." Whitaker nodded once. "That's sufficient to warrant a formal investigation's resumption. And given the sequence we hold, no one's interring this one." He pivoted to the proof specialist. "Get these duplicated and replicated. Protected versions to my quarters and investigations headquarters." The specialist acted promptly, donning mittens and inserting each unit into a scanner. The drone of the apparatus filled the space, consistent and muted. I extracted my father's ledger from my satchel and opened it to the image of him and Whitaker. I slid it across the surface. "He relied on you. He bequeathed this for me because he believed you'd act correctly when the moment arrived." Whitaker examined the picture, his mouth tensing. "Your father was one of the finest evaluators I ever collaborated with. If he indicated corruption in the framework, I should have heeded earlier." Lydia's tone was chillier now. "Scott, consider the appearances. You publicize this, and you're implicating an active foreign affairs coordinator of hindering an alliance protection probe. That's going to rebound on you." Whitaker regarded her for an extended moment. "If you're concerned about appearances, you're in the incorrect profession." The units completed duplication, and the specialist handed Whitaker 2 ciphered versions. He extended one to me. "Retain this. If anyone attempts to terminate this again, you disseminate it. It wasn't a proposal." Delilah spoke anew over communications. "Investigations is already assembling a group. They're examining your prior dossier files, Bree. Appears your history is about to receive a revision." Then the phrases impacted more forcefully than anticipated. I'd convinced myself for years that I disregarded reclaiming my position or access. But learning my identity would ultimately be vindicated. It released something in my torso I hadn't realized I'd been clutching. Lydia advanced toward the surface, her tone piercing. "If you believe this will adhere, you're ingenuous. Harlan has supporters, and they'll incinerate half the headquarters before permitting this to proceed to hearing." Whitaker didn't recoil. "Then we'll summon the other half of the headquarters to observe it occur." Her mouth tensed, and for a second, I perceived the glimmer of alarm behind her eyes. She recognized the momentum had shifted, and she couldn't govern it this time. I tucked the ciphered version into my coat. The mass of it differed from the platter I'd borne earlier. It was denser, but it felt like the sort of mass you elected to endure. Whitaker rose, collecting the dossiers. "This isn't concluded, but tonight we advanced the initial stride, and we advanced it with observers, proof, and an intact sequence." The personnel escorted Harlan and Moreau from the space. Lydia remained positioned, her footwear anchored, her features fixed in something between fury and computation. I didn't trouble regarding her as I trailed Whitaker toward the portal. My father's timbre from that ancient audio document resonated in my mind. If Brianna ever hears this, know that you were correct. Now I possessed evidence, and an active dossier to ensure it signified. Lydia overtook me in the passage, her footwear striking the tile like a timer calibrated to questioning mode. "Bree," she stated, tone subdued, "we need to converse privately." I didn't decelerate. "We've had years for that. You declined." She surged ahead, blocking me near a lateral corridor. The personnel afforded us distance but stayed in view. Her limbs folded, that refined envoy facade securely affixed. "You think you've deciphered it all, don't you? That you're the protagonist here." "I don't need to be the protagonist," I replied evenly. "I just needed you not to be the antagonist." Her eyes narrowed. "You have no notion what you're confronting. Harlan wasn't my selection. None of this was. But once you're entangled, you can't simply depart. That's untrue. You elected to remain entangled." Her mouth quivered. "I elected endurance. You've been absent too long to comprehend what it demands to function at this tier. Every exchange is a bargain. Every courtesy arrives with an obligation. I didn't divulge those files, but I knew who did. And I remained silent because unraveling that strand would have dragged me down too." I allowed that to linger in the atmosphere for a moment. "So, you permitted them to drag me instead." Her tone didn't elevate, but the strain in it was palpable. "You were always the superior officer. You'd endure it. I couldn't." There it was, the admission devoid of regret. "You could have informed me," I said. "We could have discovered another path." She shook her head. "No, you still trust in other paths. That's why you'll always be perilous to individuals like Harlan, and to me." The personnel shifted marginally, observing us but not meddling. "I didn't wish to do this to you," she proceeded, gentler now. "But once you entered that floor tonight, you compelled my action. Whatever ensues from here, we're both marks." I examined her features. The sibling I'd matured with, the one who used to slip me treats before sleep, now articulating like she was reciting from a foreign affairs mitigation script. "You're correct about one aspect," I said ultimately. "We're both marks, but you've got something I don't." She arched a brow. "And what's that?" I advanced a step nearer, my tone subdued enough for only her to perceive. "A decision you made, and you made the incorrect one." Her lips compressed into a slender line. For a second I thought she might retaliate, but she merely retreated, reclaiming her impeccable poise. "If you think this concludes with a few storage units and an admiral's endorsement, you're not as astute as you once were." "Perhaps not," I said. "But I'm astute enough to know I'm not standing solitary anymore." Her eyes flicked toward the personnel, then to the passage behind me, where Whitaker's voice was issuing directives. She recognized the snare had already tightened. I walked past her without further utterance, the sound of her footwear trailing for just a few paces before ceasing altogether. She didn't summon after me. For the first time since the evening commenced, the atmosphere felt less oppressive. Not because the conflict was over, but because I finally knew precisely which side she occupied, and it wasn't mine. Whitaker was already in the coordination hub when I entered, an array of protected terminals radiating against the subdued space. Delilah's features occupied one display, Tessa's on another. Both were immersed in their respective tasks. "We've replicated every byte from the proof storage," Delilah said without introduction. "Custody sequence is impenetrable. I'm forwarding the preliminary violation assessment to investigations and..." She struck a few keys. "Legislative supervision just received a protected notification." Tessa reclined in her seat, the radiance of script scrolling across her display. "News outlets are probing as well. Someone at the reception disclosed that the personnel escorted Harlan and Moreau out in restraints. By dawn, you'll be on every security forum in the nation." Whitaker interjected. "I don't want this portrayed as rumor. We disseminate facts, not conjectures. The information, the sequence, the detention, nothing more." "Comprehended," Delilah said. "But you can't prevent the titles from sketching their own connections. And they're going to link Lydia to Harlan, whether you approve or not." I glanced toward Whitaker. He didn't regard me when he said, "Then permit them. If she's untainted, she'll possess the evidence. If she's not, we'll possess it." From the space's corner, a proof specialist handed me a binder. Inside were high-definition captures from the platter lens. Harlan transferring the parcel to Moreau stowing it. Lydia nodding in their direction. No labels, no notes, just visuals that narrated their own tale. I returned the binder and tapped the display where Tessa was executing a document catalog. Mark every file with Alliance headers, emphasize cipher keys, and exchange records. The more undeniable, the swifter this adheres. Tessa issued a brief nod, her fingers darting over the input. The portal opened, and a media coordinator entered, appearing as if she'd just stepped into a restricted tempest. "Admiral, journalists are already assembling outside the embassy barriers. Do we release a declaration?" Whitaker didn't waver. "Yes, keep it concise. Affirm that 2 persons were detained on suspicion of sabotage against Alliance partners. No identities, no assumptions." The coordinator departed, and the portal closed with a soft snap. Delilah's voice returned over communications. "Bree, your father's ledger. There's an addendum sections we overlooked before. Seems he'd assembled a roster of tainted security coordinators, foreign affairs, defense, even suppliers. Harlan's merely one element. I felt my hands clench into fists. And Lydia? A hesitation. Her name's absent, but 2 of her nearest envoy associates are. Whitaker captured my gaze. We pursue the strands, all of them. By midnight, the initial news notifications struck the feeds. The wording was clinical. U.S. and German military officials thwart suspected sabotage scheme at Berlin reception. But the implication was clear. This wasn't merely another disclosure. It was the type of violation that redefines professions and dismantles coalitions. Tessa connected to a real-time stream from one of the primary broadcasters. The presenter's inflection was solemn. Insiders inform us the persons apprehended tonight are connected to a data violation that transpired 3 years ago and led to the removal of an honored U.S. Navy cyber intelligence officer. I didn't need to inquire how they acquired that final detail. The narrative was exposed. Lydia's features appeared momentarily in a segment, clasping hands with a German security representative. The broadcaster didn't identify her, but they didn't need to. Anyone in the Envoy network would recognize. Whitaker pivoted from the display. "This is going to blaze intensely for a week, perhaps longer. But when it's concluded, you'll have your identity restored." I shook my head. I don't just want my identity restored. I want every identity my father inscribed in that ledger probed. No more discreet concealments. He gave me a look that indicated he comprehended. "Then we act now. And we act with all of them." The space hummed with action again. Documents uploading to protected hosts. Communication lines illuminating with ciphered conversations. Specialists producing physical duplicates for classified messengers. Every motion felt like impetus, the sort that couldn't be halted without leaving traces. Somewhere in the embassy, Lydia was likely already composing her departure announcement, meticulously phrased to portray her as the aggrieved individual. It was irrelevant. The reality was no longer hers to control. It was exposed, recorded, and impossible to retract. By the time the initial surge of announcements went public, the embassy operated on stimulants and vigor. Every corridor vibrated with managed disorder, media staff managing inquiries, protection teams intensifying rounds, and analysis groups cross-checking the seized information against current Alliance activities. Whitaker located me in a calmer passage near the operations chamber. "Investigations wants you restored immediately. Complete access, retroactive compensation, reinstated position. You'd be directing the Collaborative Digital Counter-Espionage Division." I didn't respond instantly. The proposal bore significance. 3 years of my existence could be reinstated on record as if they'd never been expunged. But record wasn't equivalent to actuality. "Sir," I said ultimately, "if I accept that, I'm bound to the hierarchy again. And I've witnessed how readily that hierarchy gets employed to throttle the incorrect individual. He examined me, perhaps anticipating reluctance for bargaining's sake. You're one of the premier operatives I've encountered. The division requires you. I know, I said, and that's precisely why I can't be in it. Not currently. I want to continue this labor, but unofficially. No disclosures, no bureaucracy. I can advance quicker if I'm not in attire. It wasn't what he desired to hear. But he nodded once deliberately. You'll have my contact. If you require assets, you'll obtain them. Just be cautious whom you trust. That I think I've absorbed that lesson, I said with a wry partial grin. We proceeded back toward the protected area, passing a barrier of images, prior collaborative efforts, leaders, and envoys posing with contrived grins. Lydia's features appeared in more than one. Delilah's voice transmitted via my earpiece. Media's escalated fully. Harlan's confronting initial accusations. Moreau's negotiating a plea. And your sister, she's declared she's resigning. Terms it a tactical retreat for the department's benefit. I halted in the passage, allowing that to absorb. She's not going to evaporate. She'll merely redirect. Yeah, Delilah said. But for now, she's sidelined. I endorsed the final transfer papers for the evidence, returning them to the specialist on shift. My ciphered version remained in my coat. I wasn't releasing it from my custody, not even momentarily. Whitaker extended his hand. Whatever attire you don or don't, you've reclaimed my esteem. I clasped it solidly and steadily. And you've reclaimed mine. When I emerged outside, the Berlin night was still vibrant, street illuminations radiating, the drone of delayed vehicles blending with the distant tones of tunes from the reception above. It nearly felt like an ordinary evening in the metropolis, if you disregarded the two reinforced vehicles lingering at the curb and the silent vigilance of armed sentries. I drew my coat tighter and commenced walking. No chauffeur, no convoy. I'd spent years being a specter in my own existence. Tonight I was finally advancing under my own impetus again. The ciphered unit pressed against my flank with each stride, a reminder that the conflict wasn't over, just altered now. My function had transformed. My determination hadn't. The rap on my lodging portal arrived just after dawn. No protection convoy, no media, just a uniformed messenger clutching a slender brown-wrapped bundle. Miss Cole, personal delivery, verified ID necessary. I endorsed for it, the mass scarcely exceeding a softcover. Once the portal shut, I positioned it on the workstation and stripped back the wrapping. Within was a acquainted hidebound notepad, borders frayed, pages subtly scented of the pine compartment they'd been stored in during our youth. It wasn't my father's, it was Lydia's. Turning to the initial leaf, I saw the tidy script I recalled from when she used to assist me with German assignments. But now there was only one brief line in English. I chose incorrectly. No endorsement, no timestamp. She didn't require either. I reclined in the seat, the gentle morning radiance sifting through the drapes. My thoughts replayed every instant from the reception. The smirk when she believed she held superiority, the fracture in her tone when the personnel advanced, the resolve in her bearing when she confessed she'd allowed me to bear the blame. The notepad was replete with expressions, some in German, some in abbreviation, the type envoys employed to jot notes without revealing context. Nothing blatantly damning, but sufficient to chart trends, gatherings, identities, timelines, even a few remarks about Harlan, mostly prudent, like she'd been chronicling without understanding why. She hadn't provided me this to absolve herself. She'd provided it to me because she knew I'd know what to do with it. I inserted the notepad into my satchel beside the ciphered unit. Two distinct origins, two distinct paths. Together they could seal more portals than Harlan ever unlocked. Outside, the metropolis was awakening. Delivery vehicles thundered down tight lanes. Eateries opened their entrances. And somewhere, a broadcast played a horn-laden melody. I secured the portal behind me and entered the corridor. Coat over my limb, satchel across my shoulder. No farewell message, no redirection address, Lydia's approach. But she'd bequeathed me something superior to a regret. Evidence. Walking toward the lift, I caught my image in the glossed brass portals. No attire, no identifier, no position, just me. And for the first time in years, that felt sufficient. The lift descent was silent, the sort that heightens awareness of every inhalation. When the portals parted, the foyer vibrated with the daily cadence of voyagers, registrations, baggage rollers, the aroma of brew. I emerged onto the pavement, the crisp air bearing the remote chime of temple bells. Berlin was merely another metropolis again. No hall, no flashing lenses, no murmured commands in German. But in my satchel, against my flank, were the two elements that reminded me precisely what I was still capable of. I turned east toward the avenue where I'd rendezvoused with Delilah for a protected transfer. Somewhere behind me, Lydia was already reauthoring her own narrative. I didn't need to peruse it. Some decisions can't be reauthored. Some conflicts aren't about honors or advancements. They're about departing knowing you didn't yield, even when it would have been simpler. My sister's decisions will always be hers to endure. Mine will be the ones I can confront in the reflection and embrace. I didn't reclaim my former existence.